Chapter 2. Captain Midnite Strikes. One morning His Honour, Mr. Justice Pepper, or Judge Pepper as he was called for short, put on his long curly wig made of horsehair and his long robes, and packed his little hammer in a little suitcase, and got into a mail coach. Judge Pepper's job was to send people like bushrangers to the great grey jail by the sea, and the hammer was for banging on his bench with to stop people from laughing in court. Judge Pepper was a red-faced, shiny man with a fat, shiny watch and chain. He was very bad-tempered, and he was going in the coach to a country town to sentence a few people to spend years and years in prison. There was another person in the coach with Judge Pepper, and his name was Trooper O'Grady. It was not easy to describe Trooper O'Grady. He was a rather tall, thin man, with the sort of face that got lines in it when he laughed, and he laughed a lot. He was a very popular man, and even Judge Pepper didn't hate him, although he was quite young for a grown-up, only 24, and Judge Pepper usually did hate young people. Judge Pepper said that he was very polite, which was true, but there were a lot of other things about Trooper O'Grady that the judge had not thought of. A trooper is a kind of policeman who usually rides a horse, and what the judge had never considered is that a policeman, who is always mixing with people who steal and that sort of thing, might come to learn bad habits from them. There was another thing, too, that the judge had never considered, and that is that a young man who had already learned bad habits might feel safer if he became a policeman. The coach rattled away through the town and over a bridge and was soon in the country. Birds were singing and the bush was full of flowers, and even Judge Pepper was quite pleased to be going on a journey in such a splendid weather. He made a joke now and then, and Trooper O'Grady laughed heartily, which showed what a polite young man he was. When they came to the hills, Trooper O'Grady got out and walked to make the coach lighter for the horses. As he walked along, he talked and made jokes with the driver, and the driver said to himself, "What a nice chap." When they were about 20 miles from the town and were going up a very steep hill, a voice called out of the bush, "Stand and deliver, your money or your lives." "Who said that?" demanded the judge, sticking his red face out of the coach window. "A bushranger, Your Honour," said Trooper O'Grady. "That is what they always say." "Well, shoot him," said the judge crossly. "You shoot him, sir," said the trooper. "My pistols are inside the coach with you." "Throw the pistols to me," snarled the voice in the bush, "or you are a dead man." "That's curious," murmured Trooper O'Grady. "The voice has a Siamese accent." "Don't make personal remarks," snapped Cat, for of course it was Cat. "Stand with your hands above your heads, and if I catch anyone not shivering in his shoes, he's in trouble." Trooper O'Grady and the driver put up their hands while Judge Pepper still stared from the coach. From being a red-faced shiny man, he had turned into a white-faced shiny man. "Throw me the pistols, Judge Pepper," called Cat, "or I'll tear out your heart and eat it." "No, no," cried Judge Pepper, trembling, as he threw the pistols into the bush. "Have pity on me. I have a great aunt and 11 cousins in Wagga Wagga." "Let them beware," said Cat with a blood-curdling laugh. "Now, Judge Pepper, get out of the coach and stand beside Trooper O'Grady with your hands up." The judge got out, as he was told, though his knees were shaking so much that he could hardly walk, and he stood in line with Trooper O'Grady and the driver. "Our leader is coming to rob you," said Cat. "If any one of you moves, he is a dead man." "You've already said that," remarked Trooper O'Grady. "Keep a civil tongue in your head, O'Grady," snarled Cat, "or I will nail it to a tree." Suddenly there was a thunderous crash, and out of the thick bush bounded a tall and noble-minded horse with a long-legged bushranger on his back. The bushranger dismounted and strode towards Judge Pepper. He had a red handkerchief over his face, hiding everything except his blue eyes, and he held one of Trooper O'Grady's pistols in his right hand. "Your money or your life?" he asked Judge Pepper, rather shyly. "Oh, my money?" said the judge, shaking from head to foot. "Of course." "Give me your purse, then," said the bushranger. "And your watch and chain," called Cat from the bush. "And your watch and chain," repeated the bushranger, going red to the tops of his ears. The judge pulled out his fat purse and his watch and gave them to the bushranger, who put them carefully in the pocket of his coat. The driver, meanwhile, had been counting the loose change that he kept in his trousers, and he said to the bushranger, "4 and 2pence? Is that any of use to you, mate?" "Oh, no," said the bushranger, embarrassed. "No, you keep it." "You can have it, mate," said the bushranger, "if you need it." "Oh, no, please," said the bushranger, "you have it. I've got rather a lot of money, as a matter of fact." "I wouldn't want to leave you short," said the driver. "Hold your tongue," Cat called to the driver, "or we'll cut your head off and send it to your mother." "If that's the way you feel about it, mate," said the driver, shrugging his shoulders. "Your Siamese confederate is very fierce," remarked Trooper O'Grady. "Oh, he's not really," said the bushranger. "He's rather warm and cuddly, usually." "Are there many foreigners in your gang?" asked the trooper. "There are 72 of us," called Cat, "and we come from all the countries of the world." "And you are the leader?" said Trooper O'Grady to the bushranger. "May I ask your name so that I can tell the newspapers?" "Certainly," said the bushranger. "My name is Captain Midnite." "What a dreadful name," said the judge with a shiver of terror. "Do you think so?" said Midnite. "Truly?" You are rather young to be a bushranger, observed Trooper O'Grady. I'm 17, said Midnight modestly. 17, said the trooper. That's most amazing. You will go far. Too far for you to find me, vaunted Midnight. Trooper O'Grady laughed aloud, crinkling up his face. What a chap you are, he said admiringly. Midnight blushed under his handkerchief. He was so pleased. In all his life he had never met any human friend except his father, and suddenly he felt lonely. He felt lonely because Trooper O'Grady was such a nice chap, and just the sort of person Midnight would have liked for his best friend. I am pretty desperate, he boasted, going red again to the tops of his ears. I'm a plain man, said Trooper O'Grady, and when I like someone I say so. You're an upstanding, manly young fellow, Midnight, and I like you. That's awfully good of you, said Midnight, blushing more and more. Do you know, there's something about your face that made me think as soon as I saw it, what a nice chap. That was a generous and manly thought, said Trooper O'Grady pleasantly, and does great credit to your good nature. Which makes me think, now I wonder, before you go, I shan't keep you a minute, will you let me whisper something, as man to man and friend to friend, in your ear? It's a word of advice, explained the trooper, dropping his voice, that I wouldn't wish the judge to hear. Yes, said Midnight, coming close. The trooper bent his head and whispered in Midnight's ear. At the same time he put his arm around Midnight in the friendliest way. O'Grady, Cat called suddenly from the bush, stand back and put up your hands, or I'll shoot you so full of holes that you'll look like lace. Well said, applauded Trooper O'Grady as he jumped back in line. Captain Midnight, sir, called Cat. It's time to go. Oh, must I? Said Midnight. Hurry, hurry, called Cat bad-temperedly. We shall be late for our bank robberies. Well, said Midnight shyly, holding out his hand to Trooper O'Grady, I'm most awfully pleased to have met you. Captain Midnight, I'm proud to know you, said Trooper O'Grady, shaking his hands and smiling his nicest smile. Midnight bowed to the judge and in one leap sprang to the saddle. Good night. Goodbye, he cried, waving to his hat to the trooper, and with that he pranced away into the bush, looking extremely bold and dashing. What a vile desperado, snarled Judge Pepper, gnashing his false teeth and shaking his fist after Midnight. What a charming idiot, murmured Trooper O'Grady, smiling and smiling. Red Ned galloped and pranced and galloped until he reached the secret rendezvous, where they went to meet Cat and Jip and Major. There Midnight dismounted and lay down to wait in the warm, soft grass. When Cat arrived, he was so angry that he looked a different cat. His coffee-coloured tail was lashing back and forth like a whip, and his blue eyes were round and glaring. What's the matter, Cat? Asked Midnight in a nervous voice. You are the matter, said Cat furiously. You have no more sense than Dora. But what have I done? Asked Midnight. Why didn't you rob O'Grady? Cat demanded. He was such a nice chap, said Midnight. And you let him put his arm around you, Cat cried. In another second, if I had not called out, he would have seized the pistol and arrested you. Cat, you don't know what a nice fellow he is, said Midnight. He was giving me some advice. What advice? Asked Cat scornfully. He said, beware of pickpockets. What? Cried Cat. Beware of pickpockets, Midnight repeated. That's what he said. Cat was quiet for a very long time. He closed his eyes and sat perfectly still. He held his breath and counted silently to 100. Then he said, Midnight? Yes, said Midnight. When you robbed the judge, Cat said, you put the watch and purse into your coat pocket, did you not? Yes, said Midnight. Are they there now? Asked Cat. Midnight felt in his pocket. Then he held it open and looked into it. Then he looked at Jip and Major and Red and Ned. Finally he looked at Cat. No, said Midnight. Cat said nothing at all, but curled up in the grass and pretended to go to sleep. Cat, he seemed such a nice chap, cried Midnight. He is a common thief, murmured Cat, a common pickpocket, and you, a bushranger, have let him pick your pocket. I shall never trust a human being again, said Midnight sadly. Don't, advised Cat, and thank heaven in your prayers every night that you have 5 animals to look after you. For a long time after he was robbed by the trooper, Midnight stayed in the hidden valley, thinking bitter thoughts about human beings. He was so bitter that he did not want to see any other human beings ever again, not even to rob them. One day Cat said to him, You have not been bushranging in nearly 2 weeks. I am too bitter, said Midnight. Well, don't sit here sulking, said Cat. Go out and take revenge on the human race. How? Asked Midnight. By robbing them, said Cat. How else? So Midnight began bushranging again, and soon he was the terror of Australia. He held up coaches and he bushranged sheep and horses and cattle. His name was in newspapers all over the world, and troopers and soldiers and black trackers roamed everywhere looking for them. The black trackers were Australian Aboriginals who were very clever at following people's footprints in the dust, and can even tell you whose footprints they are, if it is someone they already know. But though they searched everywhere for Midnite's footprints, they never found a sign of him. This was because Cat, who was by far the wisest person in Australia, had told Midnite to make himself shoes of sheepskin with the wool on the outside, so the only tracks that Midnite left in the dust were little curly lines that might have been made by the wind. Time went by and Midnite grew more and more famous. Judges and troopers were furious with him, ladies were falling in love with him, poets were making songs about him, and painters were painting pictures of him holding up coaches with titles like Bailed Up. All the Irish people said he was Irish, and all the English people said he was English, or French. The governor's lady said that she believed that Midnite was a duke in disguise, and the president of America said that he knew for a fact that Midnite was a downtrodden peasant spreading his eagle's wings. Here is a story to show you how famous Midnite was. One day in Hidden Valley, Cat said to Midnite, "There is no more jam." "The best jam in the colony is made by Mrs. Schiffel," said Midnite. "I shall go to her house and bushrange some." That night he rode to Mrs. Schiffel's gate and left Red Ned in the bush. He crept up like a shadow in his sheepskin shoes and forced the lock of the pantry door. The house was dark, and Mrs. Schiffel, who was a widow and lived all alone, was in bed. Midnite struck a match and began to pack Mrs. Schiffel's jam into his saddlebags. "Sst," whispered Cat, who was keeping watch. "Someone is coming with a candle." In a flash, Cat had hidden himself, but it was too late for Midnite. He had only time to put up his handkerchief over his face before Mrs. Schiffel came in with a light. Mrs. Schiffel looked at Midnite's handkerchief and his sheepskin shoes and knew straight away who he was. But instead of screaming, she said, "Captain Midnite?" "Ma'am," said Midnite, bowing politely. "Quick," said Mrs. Schiffel, "hide under the bed. There's not a moment to lose. The troopers are coming." She ran into her bedroom, and Midnite ran after her and slipped swift as a snake under the bed. Then Mrs. Schiffel got between the sheets and blew out the candle and went to sleep. Mrs. Schiffel was a restless sleeper, and every time she turned over the bed went thump and woke Midnite up, so that he had a very bad night. Several times during the night Cat came in and whispered that there was not a sign of troopers for miles around, but Midnite thought it was best to stay where he was and trust Mrs. Schiffel. At last, towards daybreak, he fell into a sound sleep. He was wakened by Mrs. Schiffel, all fresh and smiling, saying, "Captain Midnite, your breakfast is ready." Midnite was very tired and stiff, but Mrs. Schiffel cooked the best breakfast in the colony, and he soon cheered up again. As he was drinking his coffee, holding up his handkerchief with one hand so that he could get to his mouth, Mrs. Schiffel said, "Captain Midnite, please write to in my visitor's book." "Your visitor's book, ma'am?" said Midnite, surprised. "My visitor's book," said Mrs. Schiffel, putting a large book in front of him and giving him pen and ink. So Midnite wrote in the book as follows: Date 6666. Name Captain Midnite. Address The Secret Hideout, Western Australia. Remarks: the underneath of Mrs. Schiffel's bed is remarkably free from dust and fluffy stuff. When she had read what Midnite had written, Mrs. Schiffel smiled and then blushed and said, "Captain Midnite, I have something to confess to you." "Yes, ma'am," said Midnite. "There were no troopers here last night," said Mrs. Schiffel. "I told you a story." "But why, ma'am?" asked Midnite, wrinkling his forehead. "It has been my lifelong ambition," said Mrs. Schiffel, "to hide a bushranger under my bed." "Oh," said Midnite, not very pleased. "Then I wish you had been satisfied, ma'am, to hide a bushranger under your bed for 10 minutes instead of 10 hours. "Forgive me, Captain Midnite," said Mrs. Schiffel. "I forgive you," said Midnite, who had enjoyed his breakfast, "but I am not going to give you back your jam." After that he shook hands politely with Mrs. Schiffel and went off into the bush with his saddlebag full of jam, which he fastened securely to Red Ned's saddle. Then Midnite and Cat sprang onto Red Ned's back, and the gang dashingly galloped away to the Hidden Valley. "I really don't understand human beings," Midnite said to Cat in a puzzled voice. "It is true," said Cat, "that they are very complicated." "But you understand them," said Midnite. "Oh, I understand them," said Cat, "of course. They are not nearly so complicated as cats."